My son knocked on my door at 11 o'clock at night, and he hadn't done that in 15 years. His tie was loose, his face was gray, and the first words out of his mouth were not hello. They were, "Dad, I need your help." The whole plant walked out. 900 people. They won't come back to the table for me. They said they'll only talk to one man. He could barely get the last part out. They said they'll only talk to Weldon Barnes. They said, "Get his father." I stood in my doorway in my undershirt, 74 years old, looking at the son who'd spent his whole life ashamed of me, and I understood that the thing he'd been embarrassed by had just become the only thing that could save him.
Welcome back to The Forgotten Father.
Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to do right by the ones who raised them. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to stay till the end. My name is Weldon Barnes. I am 74 years old. I live in Flint, Michigan, in a union-built house on a street where everybody knows everybody. I drive a 20-year-old truck. I wear a jacket with a union local patch on it that's older than my son. My hands are big and scarred, and one finger doesn't bend right anymore. I worked the line for 41 years. Most people who see me see an old factory hand. A blue-collar relic from a Flint that doesn't exist anymore. That's part of the truth, but I want to tell you a secret, and you'll need it, so hold on to it. I wasn't just a line worker. For 30 of those 41 years, I was a union man, an organizer, a steward, and for the last 15, the president of my local, one of the biggest in the state. I sat across the table from company executives, and I won things for working people. Real things, pensions, safety rules that kept men alive. Wages that let a man raise a family on one income. I led 3 strikes and settled a dozen more without one. There are thousands of people in this town, and their children, and their children's children, who have the lives they have because of contracts I fought for at 2 in the morning across a table from men in better suits than I'll ever own. In this town, among working people, the name Weldon Barnes means something. It means the man who never sold them out. But my own son spent his life wishing that name meant something else. Let me tell you why I became a union man. Because it started with blood. My own father worked the line before me. In 1962, a machine took 2 of his fingers because the company wouldn't spend money on a guard that cost $11. $11. They gave him a week off and docked his pay for it. No union then. No protection, just a man and his hands against a company that saw him as a part it could replace. I was 12. I watched my father come home with his hand wrapped in a bloody rag, and I watched him cry at the kitchen table, not from the pain, but from the shame of being treated like nothing. I decided that day, nobody was going to do that to my people again. Not while I was breathing. That $11 guard is why I gave my life to the union. So no other 12-year-old would watch his father cry over a hand the company wouldn't protect. I met Carol in 1970 on a picket line. She was bringing coffee to the strikers in the January cold. She had a fire in her I've never seen before or since. She married a man with no money and a big cause, and she never once asked me to want less for our people. She ran the strike kitchens for 30 years. When a family's check stopped during a walkout, Carol made sure their kids ate. She held this whole community together in the lean times with nothing but grit and a soup pot. Everything I did at that table, I did knowing Carol had the family's backs at home. You can't fight for 1,000 people unless somebody's feeding them. She fed them. For 30 years. She was the other half of everything I ever won. Let me tell you about my son. His name is Trevor. He's 48, and Trevor got out of the working class as fast as he could, and I was proud of him for it at first. He got a business degree. He climbed the corporate ladder. And somewhere on that ladder, he decided that his father, the union man, the factory hand, was an embarrassment. A dinosaur. Trevor went into management, plant management. He became exactly the kind of man I spent my life sitting across the table from. And he was ashamed of where he came from. He'd introduce me as my dad, he's retired, and change the subject fast if anyone asked from what. He didn't want his executive friends knowing his father was a union boss. He thought it made him look small. He spent 30 years trying to erase the very thing that paid for his education. Here's what hurt, and I'll be honest. It wasn't that he went into management. A man can be whatever he wants. It was that he came to believe the people I fought for my whole life were beneath him. He'd talk about labor like it was a problem to be managed. He'd talk about workers, the kind of people who raised him, who filled our kitchen at every union potluck of his childhood, like they were numbers on a cost sheet. My son looked at the working people of this town, my people, his people, and he saw an expense. And he looked at his father, who gave those people 40 years, and he saw an embarrassment. That's a specific kind of heartbreak, to watch your child become the thing you spent your life standing against. My wife, Carol, worked the union auxiliary for 30 years. She organized the strike kitchens, fed families when the checks stopped, held this whole community together in the hard times. She passed 4 years ago. Half of Flint came to her funeral. Working people, filling a church, for a line worker's wife who'd fed them when they were hungry. Trevor stood up front in his good suit, and I watched him look around at all those people, and I don't think he understood even then what he was seeing. A lifetime of solidarity, standing in the pews. He just saw a crowd of factory workers. He never saw what his mother and I had built with them. Love, trust, the kind that doesn't show up on a balance sheet. The shame didn't happen overnight. I watched it grow for years, and I couldn't stop it. When Trevor got his first management job, he stopped coming to the Union Hall for the Christmas party, the one he'd loved as a boy. He said it wasn't appropriate for someone in his position. When he bought his big house in the suburbs, he didn't invite the old crowd to the housewarming, said they wouldn't be comfortable. He meant he wouldn't. He took down the photo I gave him, me speaking at the 1988 rally, 10,000 workers behind me, because it didn't fit his office. He'd correct people who called me a union leader. Retired, he'd say. He's retired. Like the fight was something you clock out of. A man tells you what he thinks of you in 100 small moments, long before the big one. I collected every one of those moments, and I forgave them, because that's what a father does. But I won't pretend they didn't cut. Watching your boy climb a ladder by stepping on the very people who held it steady for him, that's a wound that doesn't close. I want to talk to you directly for a second, because I know some of you have lived a version of this. Maybe you worked with your hands. Maybe you gave your life to a job, a cause, a community, and you raised kids who grew up to be embarrassed by it. Ashamed of the calluses. Ashamed of the neighborhood. Ashamed of the accent, the truck, the union hall, the whole hard honest world that paid for their soft new one. There's a particular ache in it. It's not that they did better than you. You wanted them to do better. It's that doing better taught them to look down on you. If that's you, hear an old union man, you are not beneath them. You are underneath them. You're the floor they're standing on to look down, and the day something shakes that floor, they're going to remember real quick who's been holding them up the whole time. If you've made it this far, do me one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. Now let me tell you what happened at the plant. Trevor had climbed all the way up to running a plant. A big one, 900 workers, the same auto parts plant where I'd worked the line 40 years before, though he never liked to mention that. And Trevor's bosses, the ownership group, wanted to cut costs. Slash the pension contributions. Gut the safety budget. Freeze wages while profits climbed. Push a contract on the workers that took away things men had died to win. and they put my son in charge of ramming it through. Trevor thought it would be easy. He thought these were just workers, just labor, just numbers who'd grumble and sign. He'd forgotten, if he ever knew, that the people on that floor were the sons and daughters and grandkids of the people I'd organized. That solidarity is passed down in this town like a family Bible. So when Trevor's ownership group pushed too hard, the plant walked out. All 900 of them. A wildcat strike, fast and total, the whole floor going quiet in a single shift. And Trevor panicked. His bosses were furious. Every day that plant sat idle cost a fortune. He tried everything. He brought in negotiators, lawyers, consultants, and the workers wouldn't budge. They wouldn't even sit at the table. And finally, the head of the workers' committee, an old friend of mine's grandson, a young man named Marcus, told my son's negotiators the only thing that would bring them back. We don't trust management. We don't trust you. There's one man in this town who never once lied to working people, and if he says a deal is fair, we'll listen. Get us Weldon Barnes. Otherwise, we're not coming back. Get us Weldon Barnes. The father Trevor had spent 30 years erasing was the only name that could end the crisis. And so, at 11 o'clock at night, my son came to my door. I want to tell you what that moment was like, because I could have savored it. Part of me wanted to. Here was my boy, who was ashamed of the union man, standing on my porch begging for the union man's help. But I looked at his gray, frightened face, and I didn't feel triumph. I felt the thing I've always felt for those workers. Responsibility, because this wasn't really about Trevor. It was about 900 families. My people out on the street with no paycheck and a company trying to take what men bled for. This was the work of my whole life, landing on my porch one more time. I'll be honest about what went through me on that porch. There was a voice. A hurt, tired voice, 30 years old. It said, "Let him drown. Let the boy who was ashamed of you find out what you're worth by losing everything. Close the door. You don't owe him a thing." And that voice wasn't wrong exactly. I didn't owe Trevor anything. He'd made that clear for 3 decades. But then I thought about the 900. Marcus, old Pete. The kids of the men I'd struck beside. They were out on the street. And they'd asked for me. Not for my son. For me. And I have never in my life turned my back on working people who asked for my help. Not once in 40 years. I wasn't going to start now, just to spite my own boy. The workers weren't the ones who wronged me, so the voice lost. It usually does, when there are real people on the other side of it. So I didn't gloat. I said, "Come in, son. Sit down. Tell me exactly what they're trying to take from those people." And Trevor, for the first time in his adult life, sat at his father's kitchen table and asked me to teach him something. Now here's where it got hard, because Trevor didn't just want me to calm the workers down so he could push through the bad deal. At first, that's what he thought he wanted. He said, "Dad, if you just tell them to come back, they'll listen to you. Help me get this contract signed." And I looked at my son, and I said, "No." He blinked. "No?" And I told him the truth. "Trevor, I'm not going to help you rob those people. I spent 40 years making sure a man like you couldn't do to them what you're trying to do right now. If you want my help, it won't be to break them. It'll be to do right by them. Those are the only terms I've got. They're the only terms I've ever had." I watched something happen in my son's face then. He'd come for a weapon, and I'd offered him a conscience instead. And he was desperate enough, cornered enough, that he actually listened. For the first time in 30 years, my son sat and listened to his father talk about working people as people. I told him about the pension I fought for in 1988 and the 3 men who didn't die in 1994 because of a safety rule we struck for. I told him what those numbers on his cost sheet actually were. Families, kitchens, kids in college. I talked until 3 in the morning. And somewhere in there my son started to cry. He said, "Dad, I never thought about it like that. I've been on the other side of the table so long I forgot there were people on the other side of it." And I said, "I know, son, that's what that side does to you. It's not too late to come back. I have to tell you about walking into that hall, because it undid me. I hadn't been back in years. Not since Carol's funeral reception. I walked through those doors leaning on my bad knee, an old man in a patched jacket, my son nervous behind me in his good suit. And the room went quiet. Then old Pete Kaczmarek, 81 now, who'd struck alongside me in 88, stood up out of his chair. It took him a while, and he started to clap. Slow, just him. Then the young ones stood. Then everyone, 900 workers worth of representatives, on their feet, clapping for an old man who thought he was done being useful. I had to stop and hold the doorframe. Because I saw faces in that room I'd known for 50 years, and the children of faces I'd buried, and I understood that everything I'd built was still standing. Not a building, not a contract. Trust. Passed down like an heirloom. They remembered. After all these years, they remembered who never sold them out. I thought of Carol then. She should have been there with her coffee pot, working the room, knowing every name. I felt her anyway. I heard her say, plain as the picket line where we met, "Go on, Weldon, your people need you." One more time. So I squared up my old shoulders. And I went to work. So we made a deal, Trevor and I. Not the deal his bosses wanted. A fair one. I sat down at the committee table in that hall where I'd spent half my life, and when I walked in, 900 people's representatives stood up, not for Trevor. For me. Young Marcus shook my hand and said, "Mr. Barnes, we knew you'd come. You always come." And I sat down at that table, one last time, an old union man, and I helped negotiate a contract. But this time, my son was sitting next to me, on the right side of the table. Learning the negotiation took 2 days. I want you to know how it went, because it's the whole point. The company's lawyers came in hard. They always do. They talked about market conditions and competitiveness and all the words that mean cut the workers. I let them finish. Then I said one thing. How much did the ownership group make last year? Silence. I knew the number. I'd had Dana look it up. It was enormous. I said it out loud. Then I said, "You're not broke. You're greedy." And greedy and broke sit at very different tables. Let's talk about the greedy table. The room shifted. I'd taken their whole script and torn it up with one number. That's the thing 40 years teaches you. They dress robbery up in fancy words. You just have to be the one man in the room willing to call it what it is. Out loud. To their faces. Without blinking. My son watched me do it. I saw his eyes change. He'd spent 30 years on the side that used those fancy words. He'd never once seen someone refuse to be fooled by them. We got them a fair deal. The pension protected. The safety budget restored. A real raise, not an insult. And Trevor had to go back to his ownership group and tell them the plant would run again, but not on the terms they wanted, because his father had shown him what those terms actually cost human beings. It nearly ended his career. The ownership group was furious, but by then something had changed in Trevor that his career couldn't touch. He'd remembered where he came from. He'd remembered who fed him at those potlucks. He'd stopped being ashamed of the union man, because he'd finally understood what the union man was. Now, I want to tell you what happened to Trevor, because it matters. His bosses pushed him out within the year for siding with the workers, for going soft. And you might think that's a tragedy. It wasn't. Because Trevor, freed from those men, did something I never expected. He went to work for the other side. He's a labor relations consultant now, but the honest kind. The kind who helps companies and unions find deals that don't destroy the workers. He uses everything he learned climbing the wrong ladder to help the people he used to see as numbers. My son became, in his own way, a union man after all. Just took him 50 years and a walkout to get there. Carol would have laughed until she cried. There's a grandchild I have to tell you about. Trevor's daughter, my granddaughter, Dana, she's 20. And Dana, unlike her father growing up, always loved coming to the Union Hall with me. She'd sit in on meetings since she was little. She knew every old-timer by name. She'd heard all my stories about the strikes and the contracts and the men we saved. When the plant walked out, Dana was the one who'd first told her father, Dad, you need to go get Grandpa. The workers trust him. They don't trust you. She saw at 20 what her father took 50 years to learn. She's studying labor law now. She's going to spend her life doing what I did, fighting for working people, but with a law degree I never had. Out of the whole family, the one who inherited my heart was the one who came to the Union Hall and listened. She's the proof it was all worth it. I still live in the Union House. I still wear the old jacket with the patch. My hands don't work like they used to, but they shook the hands of 900 workers' worth of gratitude one more time before I'm done, and that's enough for any man. Trevor comes by now. Every week. He brings Dana. We sit at the kitchen table where he once asked me to help him rob his workers, and now he asks me about fair deals and how to read a room full of angry, frightened people and find the thing that lets them trust you. I'm teaching my son the trade at last. The real one, not management. Solidarity. Here's what I want to leave you with. This world will tell you the working man is nothing, the factory hand, the union guy, the old man in the patched jacket. It'll tell you the people who make things with their hands are just labor, just numbers, just a cost to be managed. My own son believed that for 30 years. And then 900 of those numbers walked off a floor and reminded everyone, including my son, that working people have a power the balance sheet never sees. It's called solidarity. It's called trust. It's built one honest handshake at a time over 40 years, and it cannot be bought or faked or ordered. Don't ever look down on the people who make the things you use, or the old man who spent his life standing up for them. Someday, when everything else fails, they may be the only ones who can save you. My son learned that at 11 o'clock at night, on my porch, the hard way. I hope you learn it easier. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this family.